hi there, this is Kermit the Frog.
I'm Captain Kirk.
Fascinating.
I'm a doctor, not a mechanic.
Thank you, love you. Mwah.
Most illogical.
Aye, sir.
Well, that was different. Yep, lousy, but different.
Places, please, and here we go.
Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, bears, excalbians, and things, to episode 61 of the MuppeTrek podcast. I'm Steve.
And I'm Jarman, and we're here to compare, contrast, and confer about our two favorite franchises. And what are those, Steve?
Us, the Muppets and Star Trek. We have been doing and will continue to bring to you one-to-one reviews of The Muppet Show and Star Trek, the original series.
And tonight we're covering The Muppet Show with special guest star James Coco and Star Trek original series episode, Is There No Truth in Beauty?
But before we get to those reviews, Jarman, do we have any feedback?
Yes, we had a little fun tweet out of nowhere somewhere. By the time you hear this episode, this tweet would have happened a long time ago, but Steve and I have been recording these kind of farther in advance, so we apologize for not getting back to this one for a while.
We wanted to have holidays and stuff. Go figure.
Exactly. And, COVID and all that jazz. So we had someone say, this is from That Damn Podcast on Twitter. And they say, hey, MuppeTrek, we need to get at Bach2Zach, or Zach Alexander, as his name on his profile says, on your show. So you can explain to him why the Muppets is awesome.
He must be a hater.
Yeah, exactly. So my guess was, after doing a little bit of digging, just seeing what this is about, they have a podcast. And I think this Zach Alexander is either on That Damn Podcast or on the Designated Quizzers podcast, because they also responded to this tweet. Saying, yeah. And then he said, no.
Man, Zach Alexander, super hater. All right.
He does not like the Muppets. So thanks for listening. Whoever on That Damn Podcast listens to MuppeTrek, we appreciate you. And
thank you, That Damn Podcast, for listening to this damn podcast.
That's right. And I will say, Zach Alexander, I was not into Muppets at all. I was like, what's the big deal, Steve? He's been talking about it since we were kids. And so now I'm finally watching it, though. I get the appeal. So you can turn your life around if you just choose to watch some episodes and follow along.
That's true.
Yeah.
It's never too late to do the right thing, Zach Alexander.
So there you go. And yeah, send us an email at MuppeTrek@aplayonnerds.com. And maybe you can reach out and maybe we can get him on the show
and
sometime.
Tell us, what's the beef?
Yeah, what's the beef about?
What's the beef?
So, Steve, tell us about today's Muppet Show with special guest star James Coco. Who is this person, James
Coco, a much beloved American actor of the stage and screen. He won Emmys and Drama Desk Awards, and he was nominated for a Tony and an Oscar and 2 Golden Globes. But what does our audience probably know him from? Well, he passed away in 1987, so most of us don't have a recent frame of reference to him or his work. His most notable role, and the one that he was nominated for an Oscar for, was as Sancho Panza in the 1972's A Man of La Mancha.
Oh, that was him. Okay.
That's where most people are going to know him from. But what's he up to this week on The Muppet Show? Well, there's not a ton of backstage plot to talk about. The only discernible backstage plot comes about halfway through when James Coco starts trying to advise Kermit on how to spice up the show.
Yeah.
Even sending dancing girls out into a sketch where they don't belong. But we'll talk about that later. On stage this week, Kermit introduces James Coco, but first, a trip under the sea where Nephew Robin sings Octopus's Garden. We get transported underwater, floating with swimming Muppets and sea creatures, and it's really a very good effect.
Mm-hmm.
Next, James portrays a medium wearing a racially insensitive turban, which I'm guessing is where the Disney warning comes from this week.
That's right. We got Disney warning in this one, folks.
A singing ghost and eventually join in singing Oh Danny Boy. Following this, Rolf, who tributes Beethoven with the song 8 Little Notes, a bust of Beethoven joins him in the song. Afterwards, we get Kermit on stage trying to get Robin to sleep. Then we get a dancing fever dream of snakes. It's weird, and it feels like they had a concept but no sketch.
Yeah.
Robin then wakes up to find all the snakes in bed. We then take a trip to the Swedish chef's kitchen, who's making a banana split with a battle axe, but every time he's about to start, these flamenco dancers go across stage, and he eventually trips them with a banana peel. It's real funny. Next, we get a rare appearance from Wayne without Wanda, who begins to perform Catch a Falling Star when he's interrupted with his pants being on fire, and then the dancers, and then also the snakes are there from previous sketches. Then we visit Veterinarian's Hospital, whose patient is one of the flamenco dancers. This is interrupted when so those dancing girls I mentioned earlier randomly show up, and it ends with Rolf making some somewhat chauvinistic jokes about the dancing girls.
Mm-hmm.
Finally, we get James Coco. He joins the band and performs Short People for a small, gigantic finale, as he terms it. He comes out and performs with short Muppets, and the band is short, but James Coco faints when a very tall Thog shows up and knocks down part of the set. Kermit thanks James Coco, who is cheered on by these little tiny people that you're so short that you can't see them in the camera frame. And that is what we call the Muppet Show.
Indeed.
So, German, what did you think of this week's episode with James Coco?
I had no frame of reference for who James Coco was, and so I was looking forward to the episode kind of showing me who he was through his talents and his expositions and his performances, and there wasn't a whole lot of that. So it was like you could tell I could tell as someone who didn't know who he was that he had some acting experience because he wasn't bad in like the opener with a scooter, and he's things backstage with Kermit. He made, it was acted well, but this wasn't a lot showing what he could do. And then so he finally does Short People, and I'm like, okay, he can sing pretty well. That's not his song though. It's what's his face? The Short People. It's the guy from the Pixar movies. What's his
Randy Newman.
Randy Newman. My mother notoriously hates that song because my mom is 4'11". And she's always her whole life since she heard that song, it's just terrible because short people have no reason to live. It's just awful. So he didn't make a good impression. But I think the Muppets did a little better in saving the episode because I love Veterinarian's Hospital, and it was great watching them react to the chaos being done to the show by James Coco from the backstage, and incorporating the jokes into that was pretty funny. And I really also just had a soft spot for the Beethoven sketch for some reason. I thought that song was really cute, and it was very musical minded about talking about how, the different notes make up a song. And then all of a sudden Beethoven chimes in and sings with him. Thought that was really cute. And I got a chuckle out of, they do the underwater number, and then he's like, oh God, there's still water on the stage. He's like, oh, don't worry. This next number will take care of it. And it's a bunch of sponges going out to dance. So they're going to basically scrub up the stage. They did a
similar bit in a previous episode where there was a bunch of stuff on stage and they sent out like basically dusters.
Yeah.
Like an act that was sweeping.
Oh, good. It's a recurring joke. But I would say overall, this was not a very strong episode just because they didn't really do well with their host, who was multi-talented. They could have done a lot because Broadway stars do like the best on the Muppets, and they didn't really utilize him very well. I don't know. What do you think?
In some ways I agree. In some ways I disagree, in that, this at first when I was thinking about it, I was like, man, he wasn't in a lot of the episode, which is one of my sort of bugaboos. And then I had to sit and think, no, he's in plenty of the episode. He's just never on stage.
Yeah.
Because he's backstage giving advice to Kermit multiple times. He's got his opener bit, but he only goes out for the medium sketch and then Short People.
Yeah.
Otherwise, he's not on stage. So it was one of those times where I just wish they put him on stage more.
Yeah. And the one of the two times he was on stage, the medium sketch, not just the cultural insensitivity thing, but just it wasn't very funny. It wasn't very.
No, it could have been anyone. It could have been any host.
Yeah.
It was not specific to him in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
So I sort of agree. That being said, even the mainstays, the things that would typically sort of bail the show out, like Veterinarian's Hospital and Swedish Chef's Kitchen, were interrupted. And not always what I felt like was a fun way.
Right. It's like we were being interrupted as the viewers too.
Right. And then once again, the situation where there is a backstage plot, but they introduce it too late.
Mm-hmm.
Like James Coco didn't start doing the Kermit advice stuff till we were halfway through the episode. So it felt random the rest of the episode.
Yeah. It almost felt kind of
But if he had been advising from the beginning, then it would have been funny and had an arc, those sort of things.
And what's funny is the octopus thing was so complex. They had to have been prepping that months in advance, not knowing who the host would be. So it didn't really matter that they threw that in this episode, because even though it was really great, it's just that it could have been any episode as well, because he wasn't involved in that either. So I don't know.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's very true. So overall, it wasn't terrible. what he did do was pretty good.
Right.
And then with Octopus's Garden, that big number, like that was spectacular. But then a huge miss with like the snake thing was a huge miss. I don't know. This will end up somewhere in the middle to the point where I don't think we'll ever really talk about it again.
I agree. It's like bottom middle for me. It's just like forgettable. Just nothing stands out except the octopus number was complex. But other than that, it was like, meh.
Let's talk more about that music. Octopus's Garden, made famous by the Beatles and one of the few songs featuring Ringo. It's from their Abbey Road album. Ringo wrote the song after a boat ride with former Muppet Show guest Peter Sellers. They were in, I think, Corsica or something, and he ordered fish and chips, and they brought him octopus instead of fish. And they told him all about this type of local octopus that would gather rocks and shiny objects to make a garden. That's where it came from.
Weird.
8 little notes. This is by Larry Grossman, Muppet Musical Associate. And he wrote Snoopy the Musical, another famous Muppet mainstay song, Just One Person, also came from that musical. And it was performed at Jim's Memorial and then also at the Muppets Tribute to Jim Henson. So the same guy wrote it. In a Persian Market, which was just very briefly by English composer Albert Kettleby. Oddly enough, most of his biggest hits had the same naming convention. In a monastery garden, in a Chinese temple garden, and in the mystic land of Egypt. Catch a Falling Star, written by Vance and Pockris. It was made famous by Perry Como. That was Perry Como's last #1 hit. And fun fact, he was an avid golfer and even had his own line of putters.
They always make fun of that. I think it's actually in Family Guy at one point. Catch a falling star and put it in your pocket. Wouldn't want to take a word. Like, it's just like it was sang so like ridiculously.
Short People, as mentioned, written by a younger Randy Newman. Newman got bashed at the time because of the prejudice portrayed in the song. But at the time, almost all of his music was written narratively from a biased perspective. So all of his songs were kind of like that. That one just was the one that was the hit.
Weird.
And it somehow got to #2 on the Billboard charts.
Wow. Short people got no reason to live.
Imagine a time where you couldn't turn on your radio and not hear Short People.
It was
just
like
imagine that time.
Maroon 5 or Short People.
They got short little arms. They got short little legs.
No reason to live. God, it's terrible.
But that's all the music this week. So, John, what did you think was the best Muppeteering moment?
I mean, I have to give it to the Octopus Garden segment. I mean, it was so much going on.
It was so elaborate. And then the cutaway to Piggy and Kermit separately was also very nice on its own. And the wider shot. You're right. Overall, it was kind of a masterpiece.
Yeah, it was just beautifully done, head to toe.
And something that we as an audience and they could not have imagined doing season 1.
Oh yeah, just they have more budget now, more time to put things together, more people involved. It was a lot.
The tech, yeah. I mean, you couldn't imagine doing that.
I didn't even know how those little bubbles were created throughout the video, but it was impressive.
It's magic.
Magic.
So Jarman, tell us about this week's episode of Star Trek that we watched.
Sure. So this week we have Is There No Truth in Beauty? And it has the Enterprise going off to meet up with the Medusan ambassador Kolos. I forgot how they pronounced it in the episode. Who's being accompanied by psychologist Miranda Jones. When they said Dr. Jones initially, I was like, Dr. Jones, like the Temple of Doom. But we might recognize her because it's played by Diana Muldaur, who was in a previous episode of the original series with blonde hair. And she also goes on to play the Doctor in the second season of The Next Generation. So Dr. Pulaski. So we'll see that later on. She's very well used in Star Trek. But anyways, she is apparently a woman who's human, but is in touch with her telepathic abilities. And that's necessary to be involved with the Medusan, which apparently these people that are energy beings, that if a human looks upon them, they go mad and might even die. But she can somehow withstand it with a visor because she has telepathic abilities and she trained on Vulcan. And Vulcans apparently can look upon a Medusan without going insane, but with much mental training. So she went to Vulcan her whole life to train her telepathic abilities. So now she's the one, being the ambassador for the Medusan. And the Medusans are non-humanoid creatures whose outward appearance is described as being so ugly as they cause humans to go insane. So that's apparently what I didn't really understand that going through, because it seemed like there's energy beings that were hard to understand, so your mind can't fathom it, kind of like, Cthulhu. But no, they're just so ugly. They keep putting that through the whole episode. They're gross. So anyways, they beam Kolos and Miranda Jones on board, and Kolos is in a carrier thing so that people don't have to look upon him. And Spock assists them to getting them settled on the ship. And from the whole way through, Miranda Jones is jealous of Vulcan being there on the ship because of their Vulcan physiology that can withstand a Medusan's visage. So they're at dinner on the ship with Captain Kirk and the senior officers, and they're all just lusting after her for some reason. She's just incredibly appealing to them according to the script. So every single person in that room is just hitting on her hardcore, and she's pretty much having none of it. And she's beamed aboard as well by her associate, this guy named Lawrence Marvick. And he's apparently is also an engineer who worked on the Enterprise early on. So he's kind of involved in the science field and also involved with Jones. But she goes back to her quarters after being hit on a bunch. And Marvick goes to meet her at her quarters, and he professes his undying love to her. And apparently she's spurned his advances many times. And she wants to go off with Ambassador Kolos, the Medusan. And he's like, don't leave me. Don't leave forever. Don't you want to be with a human and feel love? And she spurns him one last time, and with her telepathic abilities, she can sense that he is wanting to murder someone. And she somehow doesn't know who, but it's pretty obvious. So he goes off and tries to murder the Ambassador Kolos in his little box. But just then, Kolos defends himself by opening the box and shows himself to Marvick, who goes insane. And so he goes to the engineering section, and he's just beating people up left and right. And he makes the ship go past warp 9, which the ship never really does in original series, which causes them to go out of their entire galaxy into this void. And he's like, now we're safe. Now we're safe from everything. And then she comes in to calm him down with Captain Kirk. And he once again realizes she's spurning his love. So he goes even more insane and crazy, and he passes out and dies right there on the floor in engineering. So they're in the middle of nowhere. They can't find their way home. They know that Medusans are very good at navigation, so Spock says he can meld his mind with the Medusan ambassador, and they'll become one for a short amount of time, and that way Kolos can actually navigate them back home to their galaxy. But of course, Miranda's not happy about this because she wants to meld with the ambassador, and she's very jealous if Spock was to go near him and melding with him, because that would be infringing upon their intimate relationship. But they basically try to trick her by taking her away from Kolos, so she won't be able to sense that Spock is going to meld with Kolos. And Kirk tries to seduce her, but to no avail, which is great to watch. I always love when Kirk's seduction does not work, which is really fun. And she runs back to Kolos, but she's blocked by Scotty and by Bones, and they don't let her into where Kolos is because he's going to meld with Spock. So they take Kolos to the bridge of the Enterprise, and Spock melds with him. And it's fun watching Spock being able to have some personality because Kolos is in his body and he can see people for the first time and interact with them. But then he waxed poetic about how lonely it must be to be a human because you're stuck in these human bodies, these flesh bags your whole life, and you're not connected with everyone else around you. So Kirk's like, okay, that's great and all, but get us back to our galaxy. So he does. He navigates them back, and then he goes back to unmeld their minds. But he forgets to put Spock's goggles on, which protects Spock from being fully insane from looking upon Kolos's visage. And they're like, no, Spock. And so suddenly he's looked upon him and he starts going insane himself. So they get Spock to sickbay. He's basically gone into a comatose state because he's looked upon Kolos's visage, and they want Miranda Jones to help him to use her telepathy to get him back to being his old Spock again. And she's having trouble doing it, so Kirk yells at her to convince her to do it. Somehow that works. She gets Spock's brain back in, and at the same time, Spock's brain back in, like Spock's brain. And at the same time, she gets to mold with Kolos, finally. But in that, I forgot the entire big reveal is that we figure out this whole time, which I thought was actually quite clever, Miranda Jones is actually blind, and she uses her clothing to sense those around her. And
that's a big one.
Yeah, that's one of the big reasons why they couldn't let her meld with Kolos to navigate the ship back, because she wouldn't be able to see to actually navigate. But at the end, she's actually to meld with Kolos. She's able to go off with him into wherever they're going to go together forever and study him. And the ship is back in its galaxy. And that was my wonderful meandering description of what happened in this episode, but it was a good one. And I had totally forgotten about the reveal of her being blind, so that was pretty cool.
When you didn't mention it in that summary, I was like, did I misread that or misremember that? And then finally I was like, oh, thank God.
It's funny because it actually isn't that consequential to the actual plot itself, but it's just an interesting reveal. And if you watch back, you can see Dr. Jones kind of interacting with them in an unusual way. But yeah, it wouldn't have actually mattered that much if she was blind or not, because they could have just said, you don't have the knowledge to do this. But either way, and so she goes off with Kolos, and hopefully they live happily ever after. And we have some mention of Medusans in later series of Star Trek as well, because they're kind of an interesting race.
Okay, so you actually get to see them again?
I don't remember see them, but you get dimensions of them a few different times.
Okay.
But yeah, so what do you think of this episode?
All right, so things I liked. The fact that the Medusan was a box, I thought was itself like a funny reveal. And like, you're right. There was a really weird element where we've had like beautiful women on the ship before, but she's on the ship for 2 minutes and suddenly they're having like a 6-man and her dinner where everyone is shamelessly flirting. Every officer.
Yeah, and I thought maybe I'd forgotten something about this episode where she has some power over men or something, but I was like, no, I
thought that was going to be the reveal. Like she uses her psychic abilities to cause these things.
But nope.
But it was weird. It was just so weird to see like all of them, even Bones and Scotty, like everyone.
Like, what a woman.
The only people that weren't there were like Chekhov and Sulu.
Yeah.
So that was weird. I did appreciate that this is finally maybe the first seemingly legitimate strong female guest star we have ever had.
Yeah, she took no shit from nobody, pretty much.
She had multiple lines. She kept it all in business. She put Bones in this place.
Mm-hmm.
In that speech after that like toast he gave. So it was just very impressive. Like normally the even the strong female guests fall apart.
Yeah, eventually fall apart.
She did really well. I did like the whole idea of the problem becoming the solution, where Kolos is ultimately the only one that can get them back.
Right.
And that was very Star Trek-y, which I appreciated. And then a nice reveal with the blindness thing.
And I did like how it's usually I think every episode would have where he wouldn't want to give Spock's body back, and that would be the next dilemma. But no, this guy was like, all right, you're right, I'll give his body back. And so like that was actually kind of surprising to me. I was like, oh, I just assumed like every other episode he would just be like he would be like so egotistical maniac, space being that he wouldn't want to get the body back. But yeah, it was a good change.
Things I disliked or struggled with a little bit. A human telepath. Have we seen this anywhere else? Is there any precedent for this?
Not really. And what sucks is I really hoped she would have been a Betazoid, which is what Deanna Troi is.
Deanna Troi, yeah.
Because they're telepaths and mostly like kind of empaths, but also telepathic abilities. And that's okay because they look like humans, but they're aliens. And I was like, I hope she's a Betazoid, or Betazoid, and she's not. So it's just human random.
Well, and it felt like she was supposed to be a Vulcan.
Yeah. She trained on Vulcan.
And they were like, we ran out of ears. It's okay. We'll fix it with a line or two. Like, that's how it felt. It felt like she was supposed to be a Vulcan. Yeah,
she beams on and gives them the live long and prosper hands, you know?
And that's what I thought. And then I looked at her ears and went, oh, okay. And with the Medusan, Kolos, if he knows that he drives people insane, why would he just come out seemingly randomly? And at one point, Kirk like orders the entire crew to their quarters.
Mm-hmm.
But why? Like, I don't understand why it'd be like, all right, we're taking you through, sir. Stay inside the box. If they were worried about him, like,
I'm out of the box.
And making the entire crew go insane. It just didn't make sense to me. They treated him like a dangerous unknown entity instead of an ambassador from an alien race.
That's true. And there's a plot hole with like when he first beams on board, everybody has a visor on when it's beaming on, which I guess makes sense. Like, oh, because the box is partially transparent because he's beaming. But then when he beams back down, Spock makes an point to put his goggles back on, and then Kirk doesn't. And
nobody gives a shit.
No one gives a shit. Kirk's just fine. It didn't matter.
So that just felt weird and inconsistent in that regard.
Yeah, I agree.
But overall, a pretty good episode. I like it anytime we get to see Leonard Nimoy do something different with Spock. And when Kolos is in his head.
Yeah, I love that monologue.
That monologue, yeah. Speech is so great, but you depend so much on it and all that stuff, which is really good. And I like anytime we get to see that.
And they're real zoomed in on his face. You could see every micro movement of his acting. And he was doing a fantastic job, I thought.
And I've got to say, of what we've seen of season 3 so far, which is not a ton, really.
Yeah.
This is probably one of my favorites of season 3.
Nice.
So far.
Only 5 episodes in, but yeah, I'd say it's a good one. It's the
first one of these of what we've watched so far that I think has a chance of making it into like the top 3.
I gotcha. And that's fair. It's solid characters and solid story. It's interesting. Some plot holes, but otherwise good. Yeah.
Cool. All right, you got some factoids.
All right, so this is kind of fun. Although often cited by some fans as evidence of a larger message in Star Trek, the Idic, which is what she talks about, he has a emblem on his shirt, on his uniform, Spock does, that means infinite diversity and infinite combinations, which later on becomes like a motto kind of the Vulcan race. And it's a great symbol. I was thinking about getting a tattoo of it myself. But he wears this medallion during the dinner scene, and Dr. Jones even comments on it, like, is that a slight towards me since I'm not, capable of melding with Kolos? So Leonard Nimoy was originally supposed to give a lengthy speech about the medallion and what it represented, but Nimoy found the speech completely unsuited to the plot and refused to say the lines until he got an explanation from Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, who had the lines and the use of the medallion inserted into the script. So Roddenberry came to the set and admitted to Nimoy that he was selling the Idic medallions through his personal marketing company, Lincoln Enterprises, and inserted the scene about the Idic purely as a product placement to generate sales. So
wow.
Nimoy ultimately refused to say the lines, and instead the scene was rewritten with Captain Kirk and other characters commenting on Spock's wearing of the medallion instead, which is fascinating. As I said earlier, Diana Muldaur, it was given a dark wig to wear for her role of Miranda this episode because she was earlier on as Dr. Anne Mulhall in Return to Tomorrow that we watched before.
Mm-hmm. I remember it.
Yeah. And this episode's title is from a poem by the 17th century English poet and clergyman George Herbert from his poem Jordan. And the poem's line says, "Who says that fictions only and false hair become a verse? Is there no truth and beauty?" Which, take that what you will. It is commented by McCoy that a blind person couldn't pilot a spacecraft. However, on Star Trek The Next Generation, the blind Geordi LaForge piloted the Enterprise D as the ship's helmsman during the show's first season before he becomes the chief engineer. And Dr. Jones's neural nets, or the dress she wears in the show that can tell her where she's going and stuff, can almost be seen as a precursor to LaForge's visor that he wears, which kind of similar things. So it's kind of neat. And he has similar lines in the Next Generation where he says, like, my vision's even better than yours. I can see the multi-spectrums of light, So she says the kind of similar monologue. She's like, I can tell exactly how far I am from that door. I'm 3 meters and 4 centimeters or whatever. So it's kind of funny comparisons there. But Steve, what kind of Trek connection, Muppet connections do we have?
Oh boy. Well, I hope you got the soundboard ready because James Coco appeared on 3 episodes of The Love Boat. Woo! As we've covered many guests.
Oh God, so many buttons.
Oh God. Love Boat's out of control. Many guests from both Star Trek and The Muppet Show have been on The Love Boat, including Diana Muldaur, who was on this week's episode, was also on The Love Boat.
Nice.
I was expecting the thing one more time.
Well, we're expecting this?
Oh, there it is. Delicious. Both James Coco and Shatner were featured on season 1 episodes of the Ray Bradbury Theater, an anthology series based around the works of Fahrenheit 451 writer Ray Bradbury.
Nice. Kind of like a Twilight Zone kind of
separate
thing.
episodes, but yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Diana Muldaur had a reoccurring role on Batman the Animated Series.
Ooh.
As Dr. Leslie Tompkins. Also on the series was Muppet Show guest and songwriter Paul Williams as the Penguin, as well as Mark Hamill, who not only acted across from Frank Oz in the Star Wars films, but also played the role of the scientist in Netflix's most recent Dark Crystal.
Aha, that's right. One of the Skeksis scientists, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, I love that thing. Too bad it's gone.
I know. It's really sad.
Pieces of shit, Netflix. But German, these were the same episode, right?
Weren't they, though? I mean, the psychedelic dancing snakes looked very similar to what you'd see when you look upon a Medusan. You know, it's the same kind of effect.
That's true.
It looked very similar.
That's true. Both feature overt doting over beautiful women. The entire male crew over Dr. Jones and Dr. Bob over the dancing girls.
Oh, that's very true. Kalos doesn't know how humans live with such loneliness, just as James Coco doesn't know how people live being so short.
Yeah. He just can't comprehend it.
I don't understand.
Both feature people taking directions from an outside consultant, Kolos helping them get back to the get the ship back to known space, and James Coco advising Kermit on how to spice up the show.
Very well done. Oh, bam. What is that?
Transporter malfunction.
Okay, it's a time of the show where we transport one character from one episode to the other and vice versa. What you got for us, Steve?
Well, this week, Trek to Muppets, I've got James Coco flipping places with Ambassador Kolos. Backstage, Kermit would ask for tips on how to spice things up, only to have the box open and drive him mad. And I also think that short people would have been way funnier if it was Kolos in a box.
All the short people go insane.
All the short people and Kolos is just there, a box.
Oh, my God.
I understand what it is to be short.
I have Dr. Miranda Jones transporting over to become James Coco's spirit medium. And with her actual telepathy, she is overwhelmed by the amount of Muppets that want to murder people, especially Animal and Crazy Harry, which they really just want to kill people.
Muppets Trek this week. I've got the snake fever dream that Robin has coming over and replacing what people see when Kolos drives them mad.
That was my similarities. That's great. Yeah. I love it. It was very similar.
Like, it was basically the same thing.
It was very surprising how similar those were.
That would drive me mad too.
Absolutely. And for Muppets to Star Trek, I have the Swedish chef is going to go over to take the place of Kalos.
Okay.
Because
all right.
It would be hilarious after he melds with Spock and then he just starts incoherently yelling, "Bort, bort, bort." And he's terrible at navigation.
That whole monologue. Monologue. He's great at navigation, but his alternately usable hands are just fucking everything up.
Oh, so lonely human. So I think that brings us to the end of episode 61 of the Muppet Trek podcast.
That's right. Join us next time for the Muppet Show with special guest Helen Reddy.
And original series episode Spectre of the Gun.
So from the lovers, the dreamers, and us.
Live long and prosper, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the Muppet Trek podcast. Be sure to follow us on social media on Facebook and Twitter.
Subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform.
This podcast has been brought to you by A Play on Nerds.